In 1912, a congressional investigation uncovered something that should have shaken the country to its core. A small circle of men, not elected, not appointed, held 341 seats on the boards of 112 corporations. The combined value of those companies? Over $22 billion, more than every piece of assessed property west of the Mississippi River. And most Americans had never heard their names. This is the story of the 10 families who didn't just get rich in America. They built the machinery that makes money move. They financed wars, designed the banking system, and sat in rooms where the rules were written, often in secret. Some of their names you know. Others operated so far behind the curtain that their influence only shows up in the fine print of history. To understand how 10 families came to control the financial bloodstream of the most powerful country on earth, you have to understand what America looked like in the decades after the Civil War. There was no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no FDIC. If your bank ran out of cash on a Tuesday, your savings were gone by Wednesday. The economy ran on railroads, raw materials, and pure nerve. The government was small. Regulation was almost non-existent. And for anyone with enough capital and enough audacity, there was an entire continent to be consolidated. This was the Gilded Age. And the men who seized it didn't just build fortunes. They built systems. Systems designed to last longer than any single lifetime. It starts with oil. In 1870, a meticulous bookkeeper from Cleveland named John D. Rockefeller incorporated the Standard Oil Company. Within 15 years, he controlled 90% of America's oil refining. Not through luck, through precision, vertical integration, and a willingness to crush anyone who got in the way. He negotiated secret rebates with railroads, lower shipping rates in exchange for guaranteed volume. Competitors who refused to sell were undercut until they broke. It was legal. Barely. By 1913, his personal fortune reached approximately $900 million, roughly 3% of the entire American GDP. And then the government did something remarkable. In 1911, the Supreme Court broke Standard Oil into 34 separate companies. It was supposed to be a punishment. Instead, Rockefeller held shares in every single one of them. When the dust settled, the breakup made him richer. The family didn't just keep the money, they built a system to protect it. Trusts, foundations, a centralized family office, designed to outlive any individual Rockefeller. And it worked. The name is still on buildings, institutions, and bank accounts today. But oil was only one lever. To truly control America's money, you needed something else entirely. You needed to control the banks. And one man already did. If Rockefeller was the king of industry, John Pierpont Morgan was the king of capital. Morgan didn't build things. He financed things. Railroads, steel mills, electrical grids. If it needed money, it went through Morgan. His strategy was called Morganization. Buy a failing company, restructure it, install your people on the board, and control it. By the early 1900s, Morgan had orchestrated the creation of U.S. Steel, at the time the first billion-dollar corporation in history, by buying out Andrew Carnegie for $480 million. He also financed General Electric and AT&T, but his most consequential act came in 1907. When the financial system began to collapse, bank runs, failing trusts, evaporating credit, there was no Federal Reserve to step in. There was only Morgan. He personally summoned the country's top bankers to his private library on Madison Avenue. He locked the doors, and he refused to let anyone leave until they agreed to pool their resources and bail out the system. It worked. The panic ended, but it revealed an uncomfortable truth. America's entire financial system was being held together by one man's personal checkbook. Congress took notice. In November 1910, 6 men boarded a private rail car in New Jersey, drew the blinds, and traveled south to a private island off the coast of Georgia. They used only first names. No last names, no titles. If anyone asked, they were going duck hunting. They weren't going duck hunting. The 6 men represented approximately 1/4 of the world's wealth. Among them, Senator Nelson Aldrich, Henry Davison, a senior Morgan partner, Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, and Paul Warburg, a German-born banker from the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, who had arrived in America 8 years earlier and promptly declared that the U.S. banking system was stuck in the era of the Medicis. Warburg was arguably the most important person in the room. He had studied the German Reichsbank. He understood how elastic currencies worked, and he had a specific vision for what America needed: a central reserve system that could expand and contract the money supply based on the needs of commerce. Over 10 days, these 6 men drafted what became the Aldrich Plan, the architectural blueprint for the Federal Reserve. Now, the Aldrich Plan itself didn't pass. It was too openly tied to Wall Street, and Democrats killed it. But when the Federal Reserve Act was finally signed into law in 1913, the technical structure was almost identical to what Warburg and his colleagues had designed on that island. Warburg was appointed to the first Federal Reserve Board. The system he helped create still governs American money today. The meeting stayed secret for over 20 years. Now, most people stop the story here. They talk about Rockefeller and Morgan and maybe the Fed. But the families who quietly shaped America's money weren't just in oil and banking. They were in steel, railroads, gunpowder, real estate, copper, and sometimes in the halls of government itself. The Mellons, the family that was the Treasury. Andrew Mellon didn't just influence government policy. He was government policy. As Treasury Secretary for 12 years under 3 presidents, he set the tax rates that governed the economy, while simultaneously being one of the richest men in the country. His family's bank in Pittsburgh financed Alcoa, Gulf Oil, and Westinghouse. They didn't need to lobby politicians. They had one of their own sitting at the desk. The Mellon fortune has survived for over 175 years. Their secret? Capital preservation over speculation. Patience over flash. The Carnegies' steel and conscience. Andrew Carnegie arrived in America as a penniless Scottish immigrant. He left it as the man who built more steel than the entire nation of Great Britain. When he sold Carnegie Steel to Morgan in 1901 for $480 million, it created U.S. Steel and made Carnegie the richest man alive. But Carnegie did something unusual. He gave almost all of it away, $350 million to build libraries, universities, and research institutions. He called it the gospel of wealth. He believed dying rich was dying disgraced. His critics pointed out the irony. The Homestead Strike of 1892, where his manager Henry Clay Frick sent armed Pinkerton agents against workers, killed strikers. Carnegie was in Scotland at the time. Convenient. The DuPonts, America's arms dealers. This DuPont family supplied gunpowder to the United States military from the War of 1812 through both World Wars. By the early 20th century, they held a near monopoly on American explosives, but their ambitions extended beyond munitions. They held a controlling stake in General Motors until a 1957 antitrust ruling forced them to divest. Family members served as senators and governors, and in the 1930s, they bankrolled the American Liberty League, an organization dedicated to stopping Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. They didn't just make the weapons, they tried to shape who got to use them. The Astors, Manhattan's landlords, John Jacob Astor arrived from Germany with almost nothing. He made his first fortune in the fur trade, then did something no one else was doing. He bought Manhattan, vast stretches of it. When New York grew, his land appreciated. The Astors became America's first family of real estate. His grandson's wife, Caroline Shermer Horn Astor, became the self-appointed gatekeeper of high society. She created the 400, the definitive list of who mattered in America. If you weren't on it, you didn't exist. The Harrimans, railroads to the White House. E.H. Harriman controlled 60,000 miles of railroad track, enough to circle the globe twice. When he died, his sons didn't just inherit the fortune. They built Brown Brothers Harriman, one of America's oldest private banks. That bank employed a young man named Prescott Bush. His son became the 41st president. His grandson became the 43rd. The Guggenheims, Copper Kings Meyer Guggenheim, built a mining empire that dominated the American copper industry. His family expanded into tin, gold, diamonds, and rubber across 4 continents. When the mining era ended, they pivoted. Solomon Guggenheim built museums. Daniel Guggenheim funded the aeronautics programs that helped put America in the sky. Today, Guggenheim Partners manages hundreds of billions in assets. Here's what ties all of these families together. It wasn't just that they were rich, it was that their wealth was interconnected. In 1912, the Peugeot Committee hauled Wall Street's elite before Congress and mapped the web. They found that 180 men held 746 directorships across 134 corporations. Morgan sat on boards with Rockefeller allies. Warburg sat at the same table as Morgan's partners. The Mellons financed companies where Carnegies steel was used, shipped on Harrimans railroads, insured through Astor-connected banks. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was an ecosystem. And for decades, it operated almost entirely without public oversight. The Pujo findings led directly to the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Federal Trade Commission. But the families adapted. They moved from directorships to foundations, from boardrooms to endowments, from visible control to invisible influence. So here's the truth that most people miss about America's financial history. It was never really about any single family, not the Rockefellers, not the Morgans, not even the men on Jekyll Island. It was about the system these families built. A system where capital concentrates, where access to credit determines who rises and who falls, and where the line between private wealth and public policy was never as clear as we'd like to believe. Some of these families lost everything. The Vanderbilts, once the richest dynasty in America, had no millionaires left among 120 descendants by 1973. Others, like the Mellons and Ponts, quietly adapted, shifting from industry to investment management, from politics to philanthropy, staying wealthy by staying invisible. And the institutions they created, the Federal Reserve, the modern corporation, the charitable foundation as a wealth preservation vehicle, those didn't just survive. They became the architecture of modern American capitalism. The 10 families didn't just control America's money, they designed the game. We're all still playing it. If this changed how you think about where money really comes from and where it really goes. Subscribe to Empire and Capital. We tell the stories that textbooks leave out. Drop A in the comments if you made it to the end. And let us know, which family surprised you the most?